Nguyen is the highly acclaimed author of Nothing Ever Dies, Vietnam and the Memory of War, which is an exhaustively researched work looking at war through the memorabilia and media of its participants. He won the Pulitzer Prize for his debut novel, The Sympathizer, which also garnered the Edgar Award for Best First Novel from the Mystery Writers of America, and was a finalist for the PEN/Faulkner Award. And if I were to list all of his honors, you would never get to see him at the party, which would be a crime, as he is also a highly decorated educator and is very good at these things. His newest book, Refugees, is a stunning collection of short stories. Joyce Carol Oates said in The New Yorker that Viet Nguyen is one of our great chroniclers of displacement. All Nguyen's fiction is pervaded by a shared intensity of vision, by stinging perceptions that drift like wind-blown ashes. NPR Books called it a beautiful collection that deftly illustrates the experiences of the kinds of people our country has until recently welcomed with open arms. We can debate how consistent we've been about that later. Tonight's reading includes an audience Q&A if you have questions, and then he will be glad to sign books for you after the talk. We have copies of the books, still a few, back over there on the card, and we ask that you line up on this west side of the room when the time comes and when we call your number. So please, now join me in a very warm welcome for Viet Nguyen.
It's really great to be back. Last time I was here was 2 years ago when the Sympathizer first came out, and I did a reading in the Hawthorne Street location to, I think, about 20 people.
I was there.
You get early adopter credit for that. So it's really awesome to be here at this temple of literature, especially for someone like me who grew up in temples like this, except back then, when I was a kid growing up as a refugee in San Jose, California, and in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, I couldn't afford to buy books. So it was a public library that I claimed as my home away from home. And it was really in these libraries that I learned about the power of the word and the power of stories and how important stories were to me and were going to be to me. And stories were what saved my life as a young refugee child who had come to this country not knowing English and somehow having acquired English without the help of my parents. And I bring up this issue of stories because, I think we're living in an age where if we didn't know it before, we should know it now, how important storytelling is to us. Not simply storytelling in the form of literature and movies and things like that, but storytelling in terms of laying claim to our American identity and to what America is as a country and what America is as a project and what America is as a dream. And there are some people in this country who believe we should make America great again. I'm not one of those people. I have my doubts about whether America was ever great in the first place for people like me. So what that testifies to is that we have a great conflict in this country, not just about politics, not just about economics, but about stories, about whose stories are going to win. And for those of us in the literary world, it's a really interesting time. I've been to a lot of big literary events since the election. And without exception, writers feel as if we are in a time of crisis because the values that we believe in, of telling stories, of inclusivity, of empathy, these values are under threat. And the only positive thing, from our perspective, I think, about the situation in which we're living is that it's clarified our role as writers. I've never seen writers so angry as they are today. I've never seen writers so political as they are today. In my personal problem with contemporary American literature is that I think it's not very political. But now writers are riled up. They're marching in the streets. They're giving speeches. They're writing op-eds. And hopefully they're going to write stories that are as political as their individual passions happen to be. And that was always the writer that I imagined myself to be. When I went to college, I was an English major. And I was going to go to read Jane Austen and study the Romantic poets, which is awesome. That's great stuff. But it's really hard to justify that to your refugee shopkeeper parents who are working 12 to 14 hours a day to send you to college, that you're going to read the Romantic poets. So what really made it possible for me to become a scholar and a writer was the revelation that, in fact, stories have political meanings, and stories have political consequences, and stories can save lives. Because when I was in college, that was when I first started to come across stories that were about people like me or sort of like me. Immigrants, refugees, Asian Americans, but also other people of color in this country, Chicanos, African Americans. It was these various kinds of literary traditions in which writers were trying to contest the meaning of America, to insert themselves into the American story. That really made a difference to me. It made me think, okay, I can write about stories and I can write stories, and this will be a passion that will make a difference outside of the library. Might make a difference to my own parents, who would not understand why I would want to read the Romantic poets, but might understand why I would want to put Vietnamese people into American memory and into the American story. So that's what I've been doing. And if you look at my career and you think, oh, Viet published 3 books in 3 years, he must write really fast. The reality is that I'm just really bad at pacing. I've been working on these books for 20 years, and it would have been better for me, I think, if they'd been published every 5 or 6 years, better for my self-esteem. But as it may, it took a long time to process all the things that I'm telling you. It took a long time to try to figure out how to tell stories about refugees, how to tell stories about the Vietnamese, how to contest the way that Americans have thought about Vietnam. Because when Americans say Vietnam, they don't mean the country, they mean the Vietnam War. And when they say the Vietnam War, what they really mean is the American War, right? And so when I was growing up in San Jose, I was surrounded by Vietnamese people and their stories. And I knew that their stories were so complex and that so many of them were suffering. They had lost everything. They had lost relatives, property, identities, their country. And yet, they had also lost stories because they were living in the United States, and it was obvious to me growing up in this country that other Americans knew nothing about Vietnamese people. And that when they did tell stories about Vietnam, it was about the Vietnam War, and the role that was given to us as Vietnamese people was to be silenced. Or when we were allowed to speak, it was to scream or to say thank you for being rescued. And none of those options seemed enough for me. And so that's what set me off to become a writer and a scholar. And that's what brings me to talk to you tonight to talk about the refugees, because even though the Sympathizer came out first and Nothing Ever Dies came out the previous year, it was really the refugees that I started working on first in the summer of 1997. So it only took 20 years to finish the book and give it to you. And it's only going to take you about half a day to read it. So I'm not complaining. It's just like that's what writers do. We work really, really, really hard to make something seem effortless when actually it took something tremendously painful out of me to write these kinds of stories about people that I knew. Before I get into that, though, I just want to read a short excerpt from an essay about refugees that I published in the Financial Times a few weeks ago. Because oftentimes I get asked about my refugee background, my family history, and now I've become, unfortunately or fortunately, a professional Vietnamese American and a professional refugee. So whenever something comes up about Vietnamese Americans or something comes up about a refugee crisis, people are asking me for op-eds. So here it is. Let me just give you a short excerpt so you know who you're dealing with. I'm a refugee, an American, and a human being, which is important to proclaim, as there are many who think these identities cannot be reconciled. In March 1975, as Saigon was about to fall, or on the brink of liberation, depending on your point of view, my humanity was temporarily put into question as I became a refugee. My family lived in Ban Binh, famous for its coffee, and for being the first town overrun by communist invasion. My father was in Saigon on business, and my mother had no way to contact him. She took my 10-year-old brother and 4-year-old me, and we walked 184 kilometers to the nearest port in Nha Trang. I admit to possibly being carried. At least it was downhill. At least I was too young, unlike my brother, to remember the dead paratroopers hanging from the trees. I'm grateful not to remember the terror and the chaos that must have been involved in finding a boat. We made it to Saigon and reunited with my father. And a month later, when the communists arrived, we repeated the mad scramble for our lives. That summer, we arrived in America. I came to understand that in the United States, land of the fabled American dream, it is un-American to be a refugee. The refugee embodies fear, failure, and flight. Americans of all kinds believe that it is impossible for an American to become a refugee, although it is possible for refugees to become Americans, and in that way be elevated one step closer to heaven. The average American or European who feels that refugees or immigrants threatens their jobs does not recognize that the real culprits for their economic plight are the corporate interests and individuals that want to take the profits and are perfectly happy to see the struggling pitted against each other. Yes, you can applaud. The economic interests of the unwanted and the fearful middle class are aligned, but so many can't see that because of how much they fear the different, the refugee, the immigrant. In its most naked form, this is racism. In a more polite form, it takes the shape of defending one's culture, where one would rather remain economically poor, but ethnically pure. This fear is a powerful force, and I admit to being afraid of it. Then I think of my parents, who were younger than me when they lost nearly everything and became refugees. I can't help but remember how, after we settled in San Jose, California, and my parents opened a Vietnamese grocery store in the rundown downtown, a neighboring store put up a sign in its window: "Another American driven out of business by the Vietnamese." But my parents did not give in to fear, even though they must have been afraid. And I think of my son, nearly the age I was when I became a refugee. And while I do not want him to be afraid, I know he will be. What is important is that he have the strength to overcome his fear. And the way to overcome fear is to demand the America that should be and can be the America that dreams the best version of itself. So,
Yes.
that is